This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1004 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings. Thanks for tuning in. Football season's right around the corner, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of the $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. As you know, I'm drafting over there, and I'm documenting things with becoming a Best Ball bro. So you can use that information from that show to help you out as well. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply, void where prohibited. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. It's a mailbag week. Let's get to these questions. The first question is from Patreon. It's from Billy D and NC. It says, "Hey JJ, just started reviewing the 2025 draft guide. Great work. Thank you. My question is, what are your detailed thoughts on Jordan Mason of Minnesota? He appears to be a great athlete in a very good situation, yet you have him ranked as the 35th best running back in your redraft rankings. Do you think he has a good chance of beating this ranking and his ADP? So my rankings have him around RB35, like you said. Fantasy Pros ADP has him at RB38. So technically, from that perspective, I'm ahead of the market. If I look at DraftKings Best Ball ADP, Mason's RB30. But I would argue that he's an archetype of player that's a little bit more attractive in a Best Ball environment. Now let's talk about why. So Mason's coming over from San Francisco, and he joins Aaron Jones in that Minnesota backfield. Jones is older now, which makes me feel old. But he's on the wrong side of the age curve. Mason is right in his prime, and he's coming off an incredibly strong season on the ground. According to Next Gen Stats, among qualified running backs last year, only Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley were better than Jordan Mason in rushing yards over expected per attempt. And Mason was 7th in yards after contact per attempt. And then we get these reports like the one that we saw earlier this week, saying that their workload split, Jordan Mason versus Aaron Jones, is going to be relatively equal this year. So why have any difference in ADP between these two players if their workload split is going to be even? Now, I talked about this a bit on Becoming a Best Ball Bro, and then I brought it up in more depth within the Late Round Fantasy Football newsletter this week. But we have to do our own filtering when we get reports from beat writers. We can't just take what they say and not try to provide any context surrounding it. You know, I was going to do another question for this week's mailbag, but I think it plays into what I'm about to talk about here. It's from @TheDaveFromWork on Twitter, and it says, what guidelines do you find helpful when distinguishing between signal and noise this time of year? Everyone wants to find the next big thing in fantasy, but we also don't want to overreact to situational reps or guys playing in shells. So we get a report that says, hey, Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones, they're essentially going to split their work in half. But we're not asking about the perspective of who's writing that report. Generally speaking, the public and non-fantasy football managers, they're not going to care about receiving work as much as we should. Like in a full PPR environment, a running back target since 2014, so not a reception, but a target, it's been worth 1.5 PPR points. A running back rush has been worth 0.6 points. Even in standard formats where you get 0 points per reception, targets are more valuable than rush attempts. I promise this is going somewhere. When I do my draft guide each year, one of the obvious consistent themes is that the market is always undervaluing pass catching at running back. If you can find a pass catching running back in the middle rounds, you generally will do well with that player. So let's look back at this Minnesota backfield. Someone says the backfield is going to be 50-50, but that's usually coming from the perspective of just general workload. They're not necessarily approaching this and saying this from the perspective of weighted opportunity. So we have to do our own analysis and place it on top. We know Jordan Mason is going to be involved, but what type of role is he probably going to play? Well, we know he was good on the ground last year, and he's been a good ground game running back throughout much of his career. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up out attempting Aaron Jones this year. I think that's in his range of outcomes. But where my concern lies is on the pass catching side, something that doesn't get nearly as much focus with these headline reading discussions. Mason played college football at Georgia Tech, and he played alongside this pretty good running back named Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. So we can forgive Mason for maybe not having the most robust receiving profile in the world while in college. With that being said, his per route run efficiency, it was below average throughout that time. Then he gets to the NFL, and he's been a pretty ineffective receiver in the NFL. Even last season when he was playing as San Francisco's lead back in an offense where we know they're open-minded about throwing the ball to the running back. Mason ended the year with 14 total targets. He had a sub 4% target share per game rate. He had a yards per route run rate of 0.54. He's been below average as a receiver to kick off his career. What does Aaron Jones do well? He's a great receiver. It would make total sense to keep Jones in that role while Jordan Mason takes some more early down stuff. So my stance on Mason is that he could see projection-wise 45% of Minnesota's running back rushes this year. Aaron Jones then sees a similar number, and then a handful of other guys kind of fill out from there. And Mason probably gets more goal line work than Aaron Jones does. When I say that Jordan Mason is going to get goal line work, though, don't mistake that to mean that Jordan Mason is going to see all of the rushing touchdowns for Minnesota. It just means that when they're close to the end zone, he's probably going to be on the field, and that's going to give him a higher share of those rushing touchdowns. But my fear with upside with Mason is the pass catching. Plain and simple. We don't see league-winning players in fantasy football very often without that strong target share. So without it, I don't know if Mason really has that strong RB2 level to get to. He's not a bad pick. And I do think in best ball, this is a totally different discussion. But he's not a clear-cut target for me. He's just someone I'm at market with because of the pass-catching profile. This last question from Twitter is from @BigBootyMax2. It says, favorite Bears pass game weapon at cost. So here's my overall stance on Chicago. The Bears have a real shot to be a high variance team to start the season. I know that I mentioned as them having an easy passing schedule to start the year, and they do on paper. I talked about that earlier in the week. But to dig a little bit deeper into that, if they do have some growing pains as an offense, and with them facing some good pass rushes to start the year, I do think it's more of a high variance situation than an obvious great one. And I probably should have been more thorough with that earlier in the week. But that volatility may lead to some frustration early on with their passing attack in a managed league. Now, with that being said, look, so much has already been said about Rome Odunze on this podcast throughout the offseason. People think I hate him because of episode 990, but that's not even remotely the case. I just think he himself has a pretty wide range of outcomes, and I'm willing to lean into that more in redraft than in Dynasty, where his cost is higher. You can get Rome Odunze right now for a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 price tag. When I don't think this is a situation where he's so clearly and obviously the wide receiver 2 on that team, where he's obviously behind DJ Moore. Would it shock anyone if Rome Odunze outscores DJ Moore this year? And if that happens, Moore is the clear, obvious bad value versus the two players, at least in best ball right now. And the opportunity cost in getting Moore, it's a lot more significant because there's a lot of good wide receivers going in that range. And by saying all this, I'm not saying that DJ Moore is a bad pick. I'm saying that I like Rome Odunze and his value more than DJ Moore and his. The thing is, though, I'm investing in this offense in general. I really like Colston Loveland, and I like Luther Burden, too. Loveland was an elite tight end prospect. He could easily run a ton of routes in that offense this year. Burden, he's probably going to be their slot guy. And that reliability in the shorter areas of the field, I think Caleb Williams really needed that last year. He needed some of those easier outs instead of playing hero ball. So I've got a lot of Rome Odunze, and I'm trying to get a lot of Colston Loveland and Luther Burden too, at least from a best ball perspective. And of the players on that team, DJ Moore's been the one that I've gotten the least amount just because of cost. It's not that I hate him or anything. Overall, I'm buying into this Bears offense because even with the hype, even with this steam, I don't think they're that costly. This next question is from Patreon, is from Ranch Dressing. It says, "Hey JJ, I know that we shouldn't be putting too much into training camp buzz, but am I wrong to be thinking about Elijah Arroyo as a possible tight end 1? It's possible he's a top 2 target in Seattle, plus the buzz, plus that he's young with possible high upside. What are some reasons you like him and or dislike him this season?" Well, the reason to dislike him is because Seattle just might not use him the way we want them to use him. The idea behind rookie tight ends not being very good in fantasy, which has been a pretty popular idea basically until the last couple of years, it's actually not totally wrong. Like, we don't see a ton of hits from the position from rookies. But that's largely just driven by the fact that teams don't give rookies a lot of routes, a lot of run. When they do, they've historically been absolutely fine. And we've seen that over the last couple of years with Brock Bowers and Sam Laporta. And I think that we should have at least some idea pretty early on in the season with Elijah Arroyo. Like, if Arroyo's getting 0 run in week 1, then you can probably let him go and just be quick off the waiver wire to pick him back up as the season goes on. But that means that you're taking him with a later round pick in order to see what you've got. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Now, the reason to be in on him, there are a couple of reasons. First, as you noted, he could climb this depth chart. And imagine a scenario where either Cooper Kupp or Jackson Smith-Njigba get banged up and they miss time. There's a legit path here that we shouldn't ignore. And we know having those paths at tight end is one of the key pieces for a breakout emerging. Arroyo is also a really solid prospect. Had he tested, and if he had good athletic measurables, I probably would have been talking about him the way that I'm talking about Terrence Ferguson. Now, I'm not into Ferguson in 2025, but I love Terrence Ferguson as a prospect. In the prospect guide with the very quick blurbs that I write in the post-draft version for these tight ends, for Arroyo, I wrote above average everywhere. Like, there's nothing that I can look at that shows that he's a questionable prospect. He just couldn't rank as an elite producer in the ZAP model because we didn't get testing numbers from him. And yeah, that's definitely something that I want to work on next offseason. Now's not the time for that discussion. What I think the bottom line here is, I think Arroyo is a pretty good dart in season-long managed leagues, especially if you've got a deeper bench and you're looking to draft 2 tight ends. Like, get someone like Tucker Kraft and pair him with Arroyo. Do something like that. That kind of approach with a deeper bench makes plenty of sense. At the very least, have him ready to go off the waiver wire. This is a good tight end class, so don't be surprised if we see a few emerge this year. The last question this week is an email from Jack. It says, "Hey JJ, I'm wondering about TJ Hockenson. On a late round perspectives episode, you compared him to Greg Olsen, a mid-round tight end who is taken in a similar range each year who isn't giving you much upside. In your draft guide, you mentioned his low target per route run and yards per route run numbers last season as a cause for concern. However, history tells us that guys coming off of those kinds of major injuries don't bounce back well in the immediate next season. Therefore, the injury could likely explain much of the dip in numbers that we saw from him. So if we assume that he's actually fully healthy and back to his prior explosiveness, why can't he be a top-end tight end this season like he was in 2023 when he tied for first in tight end points per game? Am I crazy to prefer him over George Kittle at cost? Thanks." Okay, so first off, regarding the yards and targets per route run thing, that was based on a trend. Plenty of players are going to have reasons for having good numbers or not having good numbers in their previous season. I'm looking at things in the guide at a positional level, at a high level. But here's the thing. I'd probably feel differently about last year if it was tremendously different than any other year that TJ Hockenson has played in. Yes, his yards per route run was worse in 2024 versus 2023. 2023 when he had by far his best year as a pro. But it was more in line with almost every other season of his career. Now that comment about Hockenson and Greg Olsen, it just kind of popped into my head as I was talking to Jacob Sanderson on that episode of Perspectives. It was just meant to be a little fun comparison. But I actually do think that it kind of works. Hockenson has never been an extremely efficient tight end, at least compared to the elite players at the position. His yards per route run has never been over 2 in any season of his career. It's actually almost always been around the 1.6 mark. When I'm talking higher end tight ends, I want that super high ceiling to be there. You mentioned that Hawk finishes the tight end 1 in 2023. That was a year where he had 14.6 PPR points per game. It's also the only time that he's been over the 13 mark in his entire career. Minnesota that year ranked 3rd in pass rate. They had over 80 more pass attempts that year than they did in 2024. And Hockenson that year saw almost a 24% target share per game rate. Remember, in 2023, Justin Jefferson was injured. In games with Jefferson that year, Hockenson averaged a target share per game rate of 18.5%, and he averaged 12.5 PPR points per game. That's not going to cut it. That is not elite tight end production. It's just that without Justin Jefferson, Hockenson's target share per game number rose from 18.5% to 29%. His PPR points per game was 12.5 with Jefferson and 16.4 without him. So not only did Hockenson still not have some elite yards per route run rate that year, but that was during a season where Justin Jefferson wasn't healthy. Last year, his target share, it fell by over 3 percentage points per game. Now, was that partially due to injury? Probably. But does teammate competition play a role? Of course. The difference between someone like Hockenson and George Kittle is that Kittle's been historically great on a per route run basis throughout his entire career. That means when volume fluctuates and there's not as much volume in that offense, he can still come through with some really beastly production. And when volume is there, George Kittle smashes. Like over the last 3 years, Hockenson's played 19 games where he hit a 20% target share or better. In those games, he averaged 16.2 PPR points per game. George Kittle has 23 of those contests. And in those contests, he averages 2 full PPR points per game more than TJ Hockenson. Look, Hockenson is capable of handling a lot of volume if need be. There is some contingent upside. I'm not denying that at all. But throwing to TJ Hockenson when you have Justin Jefferson on your team, that's not necessarily the most optimal way to run an offense. We know that Justin Jefferson or Jordan Addison, they're going to get theirs. So Hockenson might not see that 24% target share without an injury to at least one of those players. And that's why I think overall, he's a player who should meet expectation, who's not like a horrible pick or something that you absolutely have to avoid. But I do question if TJ Hockenson has a true league-winning ceiling. And that, at the end of the day, is why the Greg Olsen comparison was made. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you had subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening this week, everyone. I greatly appreciate it. Make sure you're checking out the Late Round Draft Guide that's over on lateround.com. It's updated every Friday. You get new players to target, players to avoid, late round dart throws, and updated rankings and tiers. So check it out, lateround.com. Have a great weekend.